Formula One has been to some weird and wonderful places over the last 75 years. Some of the places they've been to seem logical because they either really love Formula One or have a rich motorsport history, and other places they've been to, especially in recent years, seem to be or are because they're motivated by money. So while we're here, we might as well take a look at some of the more weird and wonderful places that Formula One has been to. Anderstorp in Sweden, the northernmost Formula One Grand Prix ever held. This was on the calendar for a few years in the 1970s, between 73 and 78 to be precise, and is best known for two things: being the place where the Brabham fan car took its only victory before Bernie Ecclestone voluntarily withdrew it, and it was also the place where the iconic six-wheel Tyrrell P34 won its only Grand Prix. With two Swedish drivers on the grid, it was a popular event, but when both Gunnar Nilsson and Ronnie Peterson died during the 1978 season, the support for the event dried up, and Formula One hasn't been to Scandinavia since. Then there's the Moroccan Grand Prix held in 1957 and 1958 at the Ain Diab circuit, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, although the 1957 race was non-championship, and in 1958 it was part of the championship. The 1958 race was won by Mike Hawthorne, and the circuit was a 4.7 mile track that used the public roads between Casablanca and Azamor, I hope I've pronounced that correctly as well, and had the drivers driving through the Sidi Abderrahmane forest. Again, I'm sorry if I've butchered any of these pronunciations. The 1958 race also saw the fatal accident of Stuart Lewis Evans. The engine on his van was seized up, causing him to crash, and he then suffered catastrophic burns. He died in hospital in England just over a week later. But there's other countries that have hosted Formula One Grand Prix that you might have forgotten about. There was India, which was on the calendar about 10 years ago. There was a race in Libya, and there's also the Pacific Grand Prix at Aida, if you want to count that one. But the other one that people largely forget about is the one that I want to do today: Korea. One thing that Formula One has been trying to do over the last 25 years is head out into emerging markets. As countries develop and more middle-class citizens emerge with more disposable income to spend, from a financial standpoint on F1's part, it does make sense. China was a good example, as even without a Chinese driver at the time, there was an audience of potentially hundreds of millions of people there, given China's massive population. India, the same. There's over 1 billion people in both of those countries. In the eyes of F1, it must have been like, we can fill a circuit with that, surely. But while China has stayed on the calendar, with the most notable exception being to the issues surrounding the pandemic of 2020 and then the recovery, some countries in that emerging market category have since dropped off. Malaysia is the main one, which was on the schedule between 1999 and 2017, and when the checkered flag dropped at the end of the 2017 race, that was it. The Malaysian Grand Prix was no more. This being with the state oil company's logos plastered all over the car that won the championship that year, and the 3 years before that, and the 3 years after that. Falling ticket sales, falling tourism receipts, and the costs of staging the race were all factored in by the Prime Minister at the time, Najib Razak. Bernie's business model after a time became untenable, as his way of doing things, as noted by the Financial Times back in 2017, was to charge the circuits in these emerging markets a lot of money that would require government intervention to keep it afloat. And as a result of this, the amount of races in Western Europe dropped from 70% to around 42% between 1997 and 2017, as races in China, Malaysia, Bahrain, Abu Dhabi, Azerbaijan, Russia, India, and today's subject South Korea started to appear on the calendar. So where did it all go wrong for the Korean Grand Prix? Well, I don't know about you, but I remember hearing all of these problems about the track and where it was and everything else before it had even begun. Motorsport.com put it very well in just 2 paragraphs. With India, which was brought in at the same time, which was held at the Buddh International Circuit just to the southeast of New Delhi, it was exactly the sort of market that Formula One should have been looking to get into. The site said that there were pots of gold at the end of the rainbow that would have returned pretty nicely, provided the event was properly managed. To add to this, that part of India that the circuit is in, Uttar Pradesh, is the most populated subdivision of any country in the world. The population of that part of India is 245 million people. If it was its own country, it would sit 5th on the list of most populated nations, behind only China, the rest of India, the United States, and Indonesia. Korea was in a similar position. It had undergone rapid economic development, much like Japan did following the end of the Second World War, and Korea had gone from an undeveloped nation to a high-income country in the space of about 50 years. 60 years if you want to play it a bit more safe. And even after the Grand Prix had come and gone, it's gone on to boom even further thanks to brands like Samsung and the global phenomenon that is BTS. And if you've got a 9 to 12-year-old daughter, you might already be aware of this. If she's not already obsessed with Taylor Swift, that is. South Korea has also become quite the producer of cars, sitting 5th on the production list, and Korean cars are more common than ever. 20 years ago, you wouldn't have been seen dead in a Hyundai or a Kia, but my neighbour across the road has got a Sportage GT and it's pretty nice. They also had the Stinger, which was a brilliant sports saloon, or whatever you want to call it. Hyundai has the i30N, which has become one of the best hot hatches in recent years, with Hyundai also winning the BTCC a couple of years ago, with the potential to do it again this year. The thing is though, the Indians built their circuit within easy reach of New Delhi. The Koreans didn't do anything like that. The track is located here, about 4.5 miles from the centre of the town of Mokpo. I think it's Mokpo, considering that's the name in bold and all these other places seem to be suburbs, but as you all have seen from the map, it's not exactly a hip and happening place to be. It's not like Suzuka, which can be easily reached from Tokyo. It's not an hour's drive from London or Birmingham like Silverstone, and it's not got much in the way of transport connections at all. It has got this small regional airport, but it's not exactly going to be offering international flights anytime soon. Put it into simple terms, it's a 4-hour train journey from Seoul, or you go to Gwangju first and then down, which I think that's what the teams did. Essentially, they've built this track in South Korea's answer to King's Lynn, a town famous for not being anywhere near anything of any note, and just completely out the way of anything that is interesting. The track itself was built on swampland. I'm going to do my best with photos and footage because one, my Assetto Corsa still doesn't want to play ball, and even then, the version of Korea in that game is a rip from F1 2013, and it also looks like the R Factor 2 version is a conversion of that conversion, and I'm just not doing it. So we might have to make do with G-grade versions of the track from the original R Factor. But either way, the track was built out of the way, which is understandable for noise and traffic purposes, and from above resembles a standard issue Hermann Tilke track. But while the track was built in a swamp and from the driver's eye level it looked really drab and uninspiring, the area wasn't supposed to be as empty as it ended up being. Plans were to build leisure, hospitality and other amenities in the area, much like how the Abu Dhabi circuit has the cars past that massive hotel in the third sector. It was supposed to be developed into a fun place, but it never happened. It would have helped with the whole "it's 200 odd miles from Seoul" problem. Build stuff there for people to do when they get there. But despite all this, the drivers were very complimentary about the circuit and how they had to tackle it. The circuit is essentially 3 different circuits in one. The first sector is stop-start with a heavy braking zone into turn 1, a heavy braking zone into turn 3, and the same for turn 4. After that, the corners become faster and flowing, and the final sector is incredibly twisty. So how do you set up the car? Do you optimise for sector 1, 2, or 3? Do you sacrifice top speed in sector 1 for more grip in the middle and final sectors? What's the minimum amount of wing you can use, and so on. The straight between turns 2 and 3 was actually the second longest straight in Formula 1 at that time, just 10 metres shorter than the one at Shanghai and 20 metres longer than the longest straight at Abu Dhabi. Personally, I hated driving it on F1 2013. Whenever it came up in the championship mode, I just skipped it, and I actually lost the title to Lewis Hamilton because I'd skipped the Korean Grand Prix, but I don't regret it at all. I just didn't want to drive it. Although your mileage might vary on whether you liked it or not. But while the drivers praised the challenges posed by the track, there was a lot of concern about the pit lane exit, and the pit lane entry for that matter. In 2010, for the first race there, the drivers had discovered that unlike at Abu Dhabi, which has its unique pit lane exit, which, goes under the track and swaps over and looks pretty cool, the YEOGNAM circuit simply spat people out on the outside of turn 1, which caused concern amongst the drivers because if there was a mistake, a brake failure, a collision or anything like that, they might hit somebody. Nico Rosberg and Jaime Alguersuari almost collided at that pit lane exit in practice for the 2011 race, which really highlighted the issue. They did change it for 2013, which had them going around the runoff area, but still, if there was a Mark Webber at Valencia-style shunt, then someone might still get caught up in it. They didn't even put it behind a barrier or anything like that, they basically extended it round to a more extreme version of what you see at Sebring. The pit lane entry was even worse because of how it was designed. The final section of the track sees the cars go through a street circuit-like section that, after the final couple of corners, opens up and you're on the pit straight. But the apex of that final long right-hander is also the pit entry, so everybody is using that same line, whether you're going full tilt or slowing down. And because you need to slow down for the pit lane speed limit line, and once you're committed to the entry you have to stay within the white lines, it means that anybody coming behind you at full chat is going to be presented with a car that's not going as fast as you would expect. Because that corner is, and there is no other word for it, blind. I can only assume that communication between the engineers and the drivers skyrocketed whenever there was a pit stop cycle or a safety car or anything like that, as everybody tried to dive into the pit lane. And also stuff going on in qualifying as well, because if somebody's on a hot lap and somebody's coming in, that was also going to be dangerous because people are concentrating too much. But there were problems away from the track, and there was a lot of doubt as to whether the race would be held at all in 2010. Despite the circuit having a contract for 7 years, so running a first race in 2010, a final one in 2016, and then having an option to take it to 2021, it didn't actually appear on the initial 2010 calendar, and it only appeared on the calendar once everything had been greenlit for hosting and the promotion for the event and all that other stuff. The race was supposed to be booked in for the 17th of October 2010, but concerns were being raised as to where the Formula One staff, drivers, teams and spectators were going to stay, because there weren't that many hotels in the area. And there were delays to the track as well, with Charlie Whiting signing the circuit off a mere 13 days before race day. But it wasn't just the logistics of building the track that were an issue, there was political tension in the air as well. The 2011 season would see the cancellation of the Bahrain Grand Prix due to the protests there and elsewhere in the Gulf, but on the Korean Peninsula in 2010, tensions were high because a South Korean corvette had been sunk, allegedly by a North Korean submarine. And Bernie had told the organisers that if things continued to the point where there was a very real possibility of armed conflict, then the Korean Grand Prix would be cancelled and it would be moved to Manicourt. An equally bad track, it has to be said, but that's just my opinion. But the race went ahead, and it was a washout. The race started behind the safety car, and then there was a delay due to too much water being on the track. It was Spa 2021, for want of a better term. When the rain eased, they went back out behind the safety car, and it took 13 laps before any green flag racing could happen. Then Webber and Rosberg crashed into each other, which brought out the safety car again, and another safety car had to come out for another incident. So the race took until lap 35 before it could all settle down, and they settled down into a rhythm and actually got something done. Alonso won the race, for reference. He had been third after a botched stop, but after Hamilton went too deep at the first corner on that restart on lap 35, he was back in second and then got promoted into first when Vettel's engine let go. It helped set everything up for the final 2 rounds of the season, where it was one of 4 drivers that could have won the championship. In 2011, Red Bull and Vettel had dominated the season, and by the time they arrived in Korea, there wasn't much to race for. Hamilton did break Red Bull's string of pole positions though, and this was also the event where, as already mentioned, Alguersuari and Rosberg had their little thing at turn 1 in second practice, which led to Alonso, Massa and others calling for changes to be made to the pit exit to make sure there was enough wiggle room if something like that happened again. Rosberg and Button also came together on the pit lane exit at another point as they both tried to get onto the track. But by 2013, things were looking dire for the circuit and the event. Silverstone, according to The Guardian, had attracted 80,000 people for Friday practice in 2013, but the YEOGNAM circuit was going to struggle to get that for Sunday. Both Hamilton and Button had mentioned that the lack of fans was sad to see and they didn't like seeing the stands empty, and Hamilton added that maybe they should put cardboard cutouts of people in the stands so the drivers would have something to wave to. Even piggybacking off the viral success of Psy and Gangnam Style in 2012, the first video on YouTube to reach 1 billion hits as it so happens, wasn't enough. Eddie Jordan, Jake Humphrey and David Coulthard dancing with Psy to Gangnam Style with 2 Red Bull employees was cringe. Although it has to be said the 2 girls from Red Bull were actually pretty good at the dancing, and Coulthard was suspiciously good at the dancing. 2013 was going to be the final year for a race, but the problems had hit before 2013. The organisers had been dissatisfied with their contract in 2011 and had tried to get better terms out of Bernie. Bernie had refused, saying that the contract was the contract and he might have considered renegotiating if getting the contract through in the first place hadn't been so difficult. In 2012, Bernie did renegotiate the terms, and the organising group, which was a semi-private entity, managed to save 23 billion won in costs, which at the time equated to around $20 million US. Despite the savings, Kang Hyo-suk, the director of the organisers, and also, again, I'm sorry for any butchered pronunciations, said that this was still too expensive and was anticipating a 20 billion won or $26 million loss in 2012. In addition, Top Gear had reported that the teams had gone to the track in 2012 and 2013 and found the remains of rotten food that had been there from the year before, which is something that in Europe would have made the health and safety executive come in and have a field day. The race was taken off the 2014 calendar despite having a provisional date and was slated to return in 2015, but that never went ahead either. South Korea, despite being a producer of some, let's be honest, decent cars these days, isn't a motorsport nation. It's not Italy, it's not the United States, it's not Japan, it's not Germany. Motorsport.com said that the phrase build it and they will come doesn't really apply these days because look at Hockenheim. It was built in the wrong place. You couldn't get to it, and even if you could, where did you stay and what did you do? And this is something that Formula 1 is looking at more and more with these street circuits like Vegas and what's happening with the Spanish Grand Prix moving towards Madrid. You get people in, you have them close to an airport, and you give them other stuff to do while they're at the Grand Prix. And this increases the revenue around the Grand Prix as well as at the Grand Prix. Basically, rip everything out of Formula E's playbook. But the Korean Grand Prix couldn't do that kind of thing. When you're not near a population centre or near somewhere that has good transport links, then it's only ever going to be a tall mountain that you have to climb. Because of the problems encountered, the South Korean Board of Audit and Inspection ordered that the regional government take disciplinary action against those involved for miscalculating the cost by several billion won and the 170 million US dollars it lost over the 4 years that it hosted a Grand Prix. Maybe it will be back. Maybe it won't. I guess it all depends on what Formula 1 wants to do, and saying that, Formula 1 has new owners. I say new owners, changed owners, because Bernie's no longer in charge, and we now have Liberty Media, Stefano Domenicali doing all that stuff now, and yeah, all the stuff that he's doing with regards to bringing new races onto the calendar. But the Korean Grand Prix and the circuit they built, it's not going to be an easy mistake to sweep under the rug. The track is almost standing there as a symbol of how it could all go horrifically wrong. So then, a look at the Korean Grand Prix and how it all went pretty badly for a country that seems to be pretty on it when it comes to building cars and making technology stuffs. If this has been interesting for you and you've learned something or just been reminded of something from days gone by, then like the video so I know a good job was done, and if you want to see more from the channel, get subscribed and also get that bell on so you never miss out on anything else I do around here. Massive thanks, as ever, go out to the rad lads of Patreon who support me at a more personal level, and if you want to help out with a small contribution to things, then there is a link to Patreon in the description, along with links to Discord, socials, affiliate links, and other bits and pieces you might want or need to know. Well, there's super thanks if you just want to top up my coffee cup, and memberships if Patreon is a little bit too scary. So until next time, I've been AdmiralLaWind, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.